thanks to Machina Bristronica for bringing me here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about spatial audio and immersive performance. My name's Halina Rice. I'm an electronic music producer and AV artist. And I tend to consider myself, I suppose, an immersive first artist, meaning by that I tend to use immersive technologies such as spatial audio, amongst others, to create immersive shows and experiences. So just to start a little bit about what does immersive mean, because it's a hugely used word, almost overused. For me, there's two kind of definitions to immersive. One of those is technical, so it's what kind of software, etc., are you using. So technologies, for instance, that might include spatial audio, it might include interactivity, it might include mixed reality, virtual reality, or even just 360 projection mapping or LED. But that's on the technical side. For me, the most important thing is actually the immersion of the audience in an experience. So my desire with the use of the technologies is how does that improve the experience? And what I really love is myself sort of being in an experience where I feel 100% taken away and outside of my day-to-day and where I am. And that's my sort of end goal with the audience is how can I create events or even dress venues in such a way that kind of brings people to a different place and it kind of makes for a more emotional event altogether. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about my journey into immersive, and hopefully it's also interesting for people. I'm an independent musician. To show that it's possible without having to, for instance, hire Dolby Atmos engineers, etc. It's possible to do this without when you're working on your own with the right software and how that can integrate into your setup. So just to start, to tell you a little bit about the technologies that I generally use at the moment. This is a photo from a show at Hackney, Earth in Hackney, from a couple of years ago, October 2022. So this is an interesting venue because it's actually set up in-house for spatial audio. So the technologies that I'm using is visuals. I'm not a visual designer myself, but I work with a number of visual designers. Lighting, so I have sort of the basics of programming in DMX, which we'll have a look at, is all coming out of my setup. But as mentioned, the key thing with the audio here is that it is actually a spatialized setup. So when I'm talking about spatial audio, for anyone who's not familiar, what this means is the ability to split up your track into a number of different elements that we might call sound objects. And then using a third-party software, you can position each of those elements in space, move them around, elevate if you've got elevated speakers, and do that in a variety of different speaker formats. At Hackney Earth, you can just about see there's actually 5 quite powerful stacks along the front of the stage, which is very wide. But there's also, you can just see these dark shapes here. There's 4 speakers to either side, 4 to the back, and 8 overheads. So altogether, the system would be described as a 17.1.8 system. So yeah, and this, I use a software called Elisa by L-Acoustics, and that's because my journey started with the company L-Acoustics. A lot of people use Dolby Atmos as a byword for spatial because they're most familiar with spatial in the recorded format. But actually, there's a number of different spatial softwares which we'll just have a look at later on. But this is how I see Earth in the Elisa software. So this little person in the middle, it represents the audience. Here's those 5 speakers across the front, the 4 at the sides, 4 at the back, and here's the 8 overheads. And what this means is within this software, and again, I'll do a little bit of a live demo of that software later, I can actually position my sound objects wherever I like in this space, and the software is going to recalculate what signals should go to which speakers in order to attempt to recreate that vision, I suppose, for sound. So to talk about where the inspiration for me comes from, I'm massively inspired by a lot of producers who use visuals in their work. So this is a shot of rival consoles. A few years ago, he was using, I think, a audio reactive Max for Live patches at that time. But also on the other side, also inspired from the art world, which are really pioneering a lot of AV installations that are pioneering the use of immersive technologies. This is from an installation by Ryoji Ikeda, who's shown sort of all over the world. And I was lucky enough to visit this in London. So literally, as someone taking part in it, you can actually go into this sort of catwalk of moving barcodes, and there's speakers all around you that are generating noise. And the interesting thing about AV installations like this is that the noise seems to correspond with the barcodes, and your brain just automatically starts hallucinating that those things are connected. And I think that's the interesting thing about immersive technologies. It's sort of slightly sometimes tricking the human mind into thinking that things that say lights and visuals and sound are all connected together, which forms a sort of thing that's greater than the parts. Another big inspiration is United Visual Artists. So they often use a dark room as a blank canvas and then lighting to sort of create these very unreal, unworldly environments that look a little bit like some sort of alien invasion. And so for me, again, this sense of being lifted out of yourself or into a slightly different experience where we can kind of experience emotion differently was hugely inspiring for me. So I started out probably in about 2016, just playing around London AV networks. This is a network, this may have been Crux AV. And initially, as you can see, I started out with Ableton, so I actually had Ableton DAW that I was already working in and using the push as my controller. And I used Resolume at this stage to serve the visuals. And a VJ friend made a audio reactive monochromatic patch. So this was a very early sort of experience into uniting together the audio and visual elements. Fast forwarding a bit to 2019, I happened to be invited to a hackathon at Abbey Road Studios. And that hackathon was all about music innovation, and there were teams there who were making music apps in VR and stuff. And they had a couple of sort of acts play. So I was just doing a five-track set. And I was contacted by L Acoustics, who happened to be there also with their innovation, which is L Acoustics have a division which is called ELISA. ELISA is their immersive spatial audio technology. And it's actually not these speakers we're playing out of, but in fact, these speakers, these long speakers, they're 12.1 systems. So there were 12 speakers in a horizontal plane around the room. And a few days before, they said, would you like to reprogram your set for spatial audio? And at that point, I'd really never come across it. And I was like, I don't understand the technology. I don't understand how it works. But very kindly, with the help of their engineers, and it's reasonably intuitive software once you begin to learn it, we were able to do that. So at that stage, the thing that was difficult, that would be difficult access point for most independent musicians, is that it didn't have any binaural monitoring. So unless you had a full kind of 360 of speakers around you, and this is me at the ELISA showroom at that time, programming the set, unless you had the full speakers, you weren't able to understand, at least in some form, like a binaural rendition of where you'd put these objects and where they were moving in space. So I think there was some of that set that I actually had to do a bit of guesswork on. But that changed in 2021 when they released the ELISA suite, which included a binaural monitor. And again, for anyone who's not familiar, what binaural means is they'll come out effectively in stereo, so two signals, but the software is going to try and mimic to the best possibility, what the panning information is around the room, but also it applies some effects to give the impression of elevation, also to give the impression of sounds being behind you or in front of you. And the way that it does that is by mimicking the pinnae of your ears, because as sounds pass behind you, they become more muffled. So it's very subtle uses. Whether it's completely accurate is another question, but at least you have some indications of what it is that you're programming. So that was, yes, and to talk about how that integrated with Ableton, I was very familiar, obviously, with using automation. Actually, in order for your Ableton set to communicate with the ELISA controller, and this is similar, you can do this with Dolby Atmos as well. You can add a plugin to all of your tracks. Here, what this is one track with everything stemmed into sort of granular sound objects, as mentioned before. And on each track, there's a plugin. And on the plugin, I can get my ELISA source plugin. And here, for instance, I'm panning, in this instance, the left part of a stereo signal. And this is effectively moving it this direction and then this direction again using automation. So I found that there was a nice integration that I had some familiarity with already. So that show was really interesting, and I was really inspired by the ability to have another dimension to the sound that I was making, and another dimension to immersive technology, in particular because some of my work can sometimes be quite installation-y. It's maybe 360. It doesn't necessarily have a front or a rear for the audio, but some of it becomes more beat-driven. And with spatial audio, you can kind of do either. You can kind of make it a little bit more traditionally club frontal system, or you can actually spread the sound around in the way that you might experience in something like a gallery, for instance. So fast forward, obviously we went into lockdown, so I did some work developing visuals and mixed reality and various other forms of visual projections. And come to end of 2021, when everything was opening up again, I was lucky enough to receive an Arts Council grant to do my own sort of immersive event, so what I would envisage as my immersive event. So this was the Copeland Gallery in Peckham. So we hired this, and as you see, I sort of mounted the lights, which are being programmed also on my Ableton set. We've got a projected visuals, and here you can see what we brought in here is a 12.1 system. There's another speaker that's just on the floor here, and there's a speaker sort of sitting behind in order to give an almost completely 360 feel to the audience. And it's in quite a nice small venue. There's probably like sort of 50 to 100 people in the room. So it's very easy to sort of give people a particularly spatialized portrait of the sound. And the interesting thing coming out of that was the feedback from it as well. And what I realized at this point is it's really difficult for people to say why, if they like spatial audio and why they like spatial audio. It's really easy to say, I love the lights, and I love the lights when they turn purple, or I love the projections. That's very easy for us to describe, but sound separation, unless you've got some sort of basis in production, it's very difficult for people to say, it just sounded better. But what I was receiving was feedback about the audio. I think almost there was a little bit of a buzz just about the fact that people could see that there were visually speakers, and I think it gives people also the feeling that the whole event is being designed around them and around their experience. So that it felt like a sort of next level experience, and one that I wanted to pursue further. So there's just a little shot in of a few of the speakers there. So fast forward, and we're back to that Hackney Earth show. So, one of the challenges with spatial audio is once you're excited about it, it's like, well, where can I play? Because a lot of venues don't have spatial audio. It's more expensive. There's more upkeep. At the moment, we're sort of at that point where not lots of artists are programming spatial audio. So there's a little bit of why would I? I'm already running a venue and it's already very costly. Why would I make that leap? And it's interesting, though, to see that a lot of venues are starting to move in that direction. And even there's a place called Dare Shack, not very far from here. And they've got a really visionary person running it. And they've actually installed at the back of it's basically like a coffee shop. And at the back, there's like a 200 cap venue. And there's D&B system in there that they've installed, and they're doing real sort of grassroots spatial audio and AV nights there. So really interesting if you want to check it out. But yeah, more and more around the world, immersive is growing as a thing. And I think probably people have seen stories about the Sphere in Las Vegas, and the desire of people to have different experiences than just simply a kind of stereo out, and also mixing those with visuals. So the Sphere in Las Vegas is a system called Holoplot, but frequently it's been mixed in Atmos and then using the Holoplot devices to target people in the crowd. So I'm just going to show very quickly a 1-minute video. So while this won't be obviously in spatial audio, maybe it'll show a little bit of what my practice is and how spatial audio and immersive technologies can complement that. You probably see that the lights and the speakers they're not exactly aligned because we couldn't do that in the room. But the idea is that you can actually start, as I said earlier, uniting sensory input to give this more holistic impression of your show. So let's just roll that tape. Let's see if that's going to work. So what we have here is a shot from front of house. So just briefly to show you what they can see. This is a project in the ELISA controller that I've already pre-programmed before I get to the event. Effectively, as mentioned, you're looking downwards on the auditorium. Each of these grey stripes here is going to represent one of those speakers from the pattern I showed you before. Each of these little dots is a different sound object. So it is a single mono source, effectively. And these are sort of moving around as I've pre-programmed them. And it's coming, there's an Ethernet cable going to me at front of house. So I've got my Ableton file, which has got all the automation in it. And the automation data is flowing to this project. And then it's going out through a hardware, in this instance, through a hardware L-Acoustics processor. It's also possible, they have a virtual onboard processor. So if I don't have more than about 16 speakers, I can actually host it entirely from my laptop, even if the venue is not L-Acoustics fitted. If they have a spatial audio system, we can use something like a Dante virtual sound card, which is effectively like a matrix system to matrix speaker outputs into the various speakers in the venue. So just to dive in a little bit more to what is spatial audio. So as mentioned before, mono, a single sound source, stereo, bizarrely, an early form of spatial. And if you think about it, going back to that sort of illusion, psychological illusion, if you think a sound is panning from one side to the other, it's not one side is turning down and the other side is turning up, but you kind of think it is a thing that is moving from side to side. Surround sound, people often use surround and spatial, and there's possibly a subtle difference in that surrounds, things like 5.1 and 7.1, are programmed for specific setups. And the slight philosophical shift to spatial audio is object-based mixing. And what that means is I decide a neutral way where I want an object to be in space and how I want that to move. Once I've done that in the software, it is then up to the software to recalculate, given any speaker system, what that means. So if it's coming out as a binaural output, if it's coming out in a movie theater, if it's coming out in the showroom in L-Acoustics, for instance, what you can do in the software is very quickly re-upload a different speaker pattern, and the software recalculates and tries to give the best impression of where you've placed that sound and how it's moving. So I'd say it's a speaker setup agnostic. And as mentioned before, there are lots of different tools. So obviously, Atmos is what people are very familiar with. That's Elisa at the top, this envelope. There's also things like Spat Revolution, which I've not had a chance to use as yet. But there's lots of different ways. I think D&B have D&B Soundscape. And obviously, I have worked in Elisa just by accident, because that's how I met. That's how I came to Spatial in the first instance, through L Acoustics. But we'll also talk a little bit about recorded, because at the moment you kind of have to bounce into Dolby Atmos in order to get into an ADM file that is an ADM file which is acceptable to distribution networks in order to distribute your music as immersive sound, but a bit more on that later. So what's an audio object? A mono audio channel, and within the software I can apply metadata. So as mentioned, some of that data might be panning information, so where is it in the auditorium? If you've got an auditorium with overheads, you can put elevation data. Distance, particularly in Elisa, is just that initially it's just turning it down. So I can actually pull an object from here, which is driest and closest to the audience, to here, and that's where it's theoretically most distant. So in the software, basically it's turning it down, but you can also here apply effects engines like a reverb engine, so you can give it the impression of being sort of in a cathedral or in a church, so it's adding extra reverb as it goes. Width is an interesting one. So some sounds, this would be targeted because it's just right in the middle of this speaker, directly to one speaker, but these with the little lines around them, what it's telling the software to do is actually spread that sound. So it might be that your percussion, you want to be pin sharp coming out of single speakers, so you get a really nice, easy, good transients. But it may be that with a drone or a synth, you almost want that to be sort of a warm sound sort of around the audience, so you may want to use a little width. And this is my way of just explaining what we're looking at. So we're looking down on this sort of hemisphere. Interestingly, the difference with Atmos is that the Atmos is built on a cube. So actually it's quite hard at the moment to, you can't sort of easily map one set of coordinates to another, which brings up this question of, which we'll also talk about, is interoperability. So the ability to start in one software and then move your programming into another. So just to recap, a stereo mix is done for a master bus left, master bus right. An object-based mix is all about having the metadata. The processor is then applying that metadata to the audio objects and saying, okay, so a bit of this object is going to this speaker, and then it moves to this speaker and this speaker, and being able to change as the speaker locations change. So just at this point, what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of a look at the software. Now, obviously, we don't have a full spatial audio system here today, but what I can do is just show you a little bit of how an object works and how that pans from left to right, for instance. So if I can do this while I'm holding this mic. Here's my Ableton file. Let me just diminish this. As I said, when I'm coming to prepare a spatial mix, the first thing I do will be to split out my track, and this is a track called Terrain, into lots of individual, quite granular audio objects. So in there, what I want to think about is that object, if I want to move it on its own and I don't want to drag other stuff around at the same time, I'm going to isolate it into one stem. So, very obviously you might sort of isolate your kick and your snare. It might be that there's a few synths that you want to bounce together if you want them to be doing the same thing. But this is the point where you have to be most granular. You can group things later if you want to. And then, as mentioned, on each track, we've got this Elisa plugin, which is going to communicate with the Elisa controller. And within this controller, what I've done is in this sources page is I've told it what to expect from the DAW. So I've said, okay, I've got a kick channel, and that kick channel is coming out on one. Here we are. Here's the kick coming into the controller. I've done that for every stem that I have there. Also, if we look within settings, you can kind of see what the speaker settings are here. And here, if I'm right, that's a 7.1.4. It's actually been done. This template, by the way, you can work in ELISA, but you can use a Dolby Atmos template. So for instance, if I go into a Dolby room, they usually have a standard formation, and it's 7.1.4 or maybe 9.1.6. So you can kind of mix in ELISA, but play out in an Atmos room, for instance. But this is also, within this software, I can very easily export or import another speaker format, and it will immediately recalculate. So then this is that soundscape that we looked at earlier, and here's all my my objects. Within this, you can also, if you want to show the elevation view, so here I can see where these are actually sound objects sitting on the upper 4 speakers within that Atmos layout. So yeah, let's just take that off for a second. And here within this view, so that's where I've input all my sources there. And in the soundscape view, I can see all these sources again being represented. The other part of this, as mentioned, there's an onboard processor which will process up to 16 channels. So here I've just got it set for two out, left and right, which is actually coming out of my headphone socket. So I'm just going to play a little bit of this track, and hopefully that's going to work okay. Yeah, I might want to increase the volume a little bit. So as we're playing there, what you'll be able to see in the controller is these grey levels are saying that levels are coming out across those individual sound objects, and you can kind of see the Vox there is, I've actually programmed it to move from the back of the auditorium to the front of the auditorium. And if I then look at, I can, where's my lead synth? Here's my lead synth. Let's just solo. So I can, here's I'm just soloing. I can also visually solo those two. So you should, hopefully, if it's working right, you should be able to hear that they're moving from left to right, which is the extent of what I can demonstrate in this room at the moment. So the interesting thing is you can go in individually and decide what you want for individual sounds to happen, and then solo clear, and you're back into your full track. Okay. So that's just a little look at that software. Oh, is it going to let me present? Interesting. Right, there we go. So as mentioned earlier, interoperability is an interesting one because if spatial audio systems are limited already, spatial audio systems in exactly the right software that you've programmed them for are even more so. So this is just a shot from a show I did at the Triennale in Milan in 2023. And there they actually had a D&B system, and it was a little bit controversial at L Acoustics that I was using an ELISA system for to run out through D&B, and they're a bit like, oh, we're not going to share this one on our socials. But here was where we used a Dante virtual sound card. So again, you can do that just using another Ethernet connection, and it worked fine. And so that's just to show another. So that's what they had. I think it was a 1, 2, 3, 4. So about a 7.1 system. So almost we were doing it just to test that we could do it. So that's a little bit about spatial audio. The next thing is just about immersive experience in general, because people go, well, why spatial audio? Why do we need it? Stereo's fine. Well, the interesting thing is the use cases for it. So it's not just about having Atmos mixers that you can hear through the latest versions of AirPods, for instance. It's also about a rise in immersive experience. So as I mentioned, there's things like the Sphere, but you'll see them everywhere, particularly like art galleries, for instance. Artists' work is being split down into interesting visual arrangements. So people are just sitting in one room and it's being presented to them on LED screens. And in some instances, they're also doing that in spatial audio. So in fact, if anyone's been to London Lightroom at King's Cross, where they did the David Hockney exhibition, that's also a holoplot system. So it's all, the same guys that do the Sphere. But everywhere, there seems like there's more and more immersive experiences popping up, and people being interested in that as something to do, and then it's sort of crossing over into music as people start to integrate that into their shows. So this is an example of something I did with the Old Market, which is quite a traditional theatre in Hove, effectively, Brighton and Hove. I'd already played a stereo show there, and then they got some funding to do something immersive, so we said, let's do something interesting together. What they did is in the normal place where in a theatre where the audience would sit, we put in 4 screens, 4 big screens, and we also, you can just about see, brought in 12 L-acoustics speakers sort of ranged around the room. This wasn't the perfect layout because they wanted this to be wipe clean. It was actually a sort of vinyl finish on the screens. Ideally, what you have is an acoustically transparent material, and they even make acoustically transparent LED screens now, so that everything is at head height. Because one of the things that's interesting to note from spatial audio is some sounds are easier for you to locate than others. So higher sounds, and also if they're at head height. Sounds that are above, it's like it's kind of more difficult for people to entirely understand them. But if they're kind of at head height, that's a sort of good place to be to get the full effect, I guess. What was really interesting about this show is I played in the we actually did installation that was just playing on a loop during the day. People came in and sat on beanbags and kind of just relaxed and absorbed it. In the evenings, I played in the centre of the room. So this gave a new challenge because everyone was sitting all around. It's like, well, where's the front? So, where do I put the kick and the bass? So what I ended up doing was starting to duplicate kicks sort of up there and duplicate the bass here and here to see what happened. What I enjoy about spatial is that there's sort of no rules at the moment. And I remember I caught up with Max Cooper, who also does a lot of immersive experiences. And he said there's one track where he was playing it out in a spatial environment, and then he said, and then we suddenly just moved it 45 degrees just to see what would happen. And I think, I think that's the interesting thing. It's like the field is open just to try different things because there's no right and wrong. There's only sort of let's see how it works, and let's see how it works in the room. So again, I can't play in spatial, but this is just an idea of that event. Oh. Oh. Sorry. I don't know if that's going to be kind of annoying. Okay. I don't think it's going to play in a very smooth way. But you have the impression, which is here what we're looking at is something where we're really trying to immerse the audience. And there were points in this where some of this video footage, some of it was just duplicated across the 4 walls. But in some instances, we actually tried to create an object that started over here with the audio and then moved that around the room. And while it was an imperfect kind of realization of that, it was the start to say, okay, this is really interesting. Imagine you could do this much more accurately. So I just think there's so much to discover with this kind of setup. Here's another example, because you think, okay, who does have the money for spatial audio systems? So one is like brands and commercial places. If anyone's been to London, if you come out of Tottenham Court Tube, there's this huge place called the Outer Net, and the Outer Net have this upper part on Oxford's, basically on Tottenham Court Road, and it's got these huge LED screens. So it's like it's not exactly a sphere, but mini sphere. And interestingly, that is a place where they see it as a way for brands to connect with their audiences in a novel way. So rather than brands doing the same old poster advertising or bus shelter advertising, they can actually create these kind of semi-artistic experiences. So I was lucky to be invited to a project which was actually for Mental Health Awareness Week last May. And what was interesting is they actually have 70 L-acoustic speakers across the space there, which they hadn't actually used for spatial purposes. So we were able to repurpose them almost into a slightly more, let's just see if we can play, whoops, no, that was a bad move. Okay, we could repurpose almost into a slightly art gallery style feel, and it's free for people just to come in and wander around and experience the sound. So it was more like a sound. It's interesting because it was more like sound design that was occurring all around. And that's what that looks like in the ELISA software. So you can see there's a lot of speakers to play with across quite a large space. So another big area of development is VR, mixed reality, and metaverse. So this is where I actually work with a company in Bristol called Condense Reality. And they have this metaverse environment, a venue, effectively, called The Blueprint. And almost every week they're testing with a new artist, and they reskin and rebuild their venue. So it's amazing, you know, it's not like coming up and hanging a few new lights in a venue. You can literally reshape it for your brand and for your project. So that's what we did, because I'm an AV artist. We fed videos into this environment. Let's see if this plays. Possibly not. And what was happening was I was actually being mapped. Oh, there we go. So yeah. So what's happening is I'm in this studio being filmed by a number of different cameras, and also like Kinect. It's like new high-end Kinect cameras that are creating a mesh of my body, and then the film is being remapped onto the figurine, basically, in the metaverse environment. So they do a really nice, quite realistic looking avatar, effectively, and then the audience could join wherever they were from as a little picked, pre-created avatar. And that was done for the first time in ELISA binaural run-out. So we were trying to integrate spatial audio. Of course, this is like really early days tests. And everyone's familiar. There's some huge metaverse things with people like, you know, the Ariana Grande stuff in Fortnite, for instance. But again, it's a huge, interesting topic, because, as probably everyone's read, touring is getting more and more expensive. So it's actually, you know, a lot of artists are beginning to cross it off their list. But metaverse concerts are the most profitable concerts there are, partly because people sell virtual merchandise. So a lot of people are interested. A lot of record labels are interested in the future of that. And of course, within headsets, you have the ability. So I think, for instance, like in recent MetaQuest, you can have spatial audio, and it can be fixed in space. So, you know, as you're head tracking, you can turn your head and those things. So you're starting to get a slightly more realistic venue feel. So just having a look here at. This is what my Ableton set looks like for a show. So as we saw each of those tracks earlier for terrain, you'd have a range of tracks here. So the visuals are being triggered on another computer, actually now through MIDI. And the lighting, interesting, works in a really, really similar way to the automation for spatial audio. So I use a program called DMXIS, which is now obsolete and been replaced by something called EMU. And you can, the way DMX works is that each light has a number of addresses on it, a number of numeric addresses on it. Each of those numbers will tell the light a different thing to do. So whether it's panning, whether it's tilting, what color to be, whether it's strobing or not. So it's actually quite simple when you break it down. And I think what's really interesting, going back to the, you know, creating an immersive event, is to try and make everything work together. So you get this sort of secondary illusion, and it's really meaningful to people when they can see that all the independent elements are working at the same time. Programming and lighting in Ableton is brilliant, because you can literally see the sound wave and audition it all together, rather than this sort of separation with a lighting desk that's sort of jamming along with the music. Talking just a little bit about recorded music. So I kind of come the different direction from most artists. Most artists actually start out by releasing in spatial audio and then go, okay, maybe we're going to do an immersive event, or we're in an arena with ELISA, so my engineers need to bounce down all the stems in order to remanipulate this into an ELISA software. So I've come the other direction. And what was really confusing for me is the interoperability, because I can't, with ELISA currently, run out what's called an ADM file. So the ADM file, which is actually an open source format, is the only format that any DSP, any digital streaming platform, will accept to do spatial audio. And of course, there's only a few digital platforms. So Apple is one, for instance, that will accept them. So at the moment, it has to be an Atmos file. And a little bit was like, well, I've done all the work in Elisa. I don't want to do the work again in Atmos using the Atmos panel, which is similar. They're all similar tools, but they're similar, but it's a bit different, and it would involve me doing all the work again. So there's a kind of a hacky workaround that exists at the moment. So the way that I did this, with the help actually of both Elisa of Ed Acoustics and Dolby Studios very kindly advised me on it. So first I would produce in stereo, split the files into multiple stems, as I showed earlier. Then I mix in Elisa using a Dolby template, like the one I showed you earlier. I do it in 9.1.6 for the highest resolution of speaker. Then I record those speaker outputs from Ableton into a Logic project. The reason I go into a Logic project is that the Dolby tools are all for free, built into Logic now. I don't think they're in Ableton yet, but I might be wrong. They're also in Pro Tools, for instance. So you record all the speakers, you position those speakers back into, with using the Dolby Panner, into their relative positions in the template, and then really quickly you can bounce that. And I was almost surprised at how quickly you could create an ADM file just by exporting as such in Logic. And then you just have to go through the second process is Apple and I think Tidal, for instance, will not accept it unless it conforms to certain standards. But there turns out there's this really simple tool called the Dolby Album Assembler. And basically you upload your ADM in there, you upload your stereo file, and all you need to do is make sure that it corresponds to certain audio output rules. So in this instance, it has to be -18 LUKS, which is a measure of loudness, with a -1 maximum true peak value, which is all super clear in the interface. And then you also make sure it conforms exactly in terms of time and length with the stereo sound. Although obviously the sound of the two is not ever going to be exactly the same. And then you rerun your ADM out from the Dolby Album Assembler. And bounce the final Dolby Atmos master. And then the second thing for me was, who's going to distribute this? So I was with AWOL, which is allied with Orchard, and I actually couldn't, they wouldn't let me upload to Dolby Atmos files. They would do it for artists on higher tiers, but not for artists at my level. So I actually sort of almost took a retrograde step and went to DistroKid, which is the most open distributor that there is. Kids all over the place are using DistroKid, and it's so simple. There's just literally a radio button that says, "Do you want to add an Atmos file?" And you pay maybe $26 for each one that you do, because I guess there's a little more maybe hosting and administration involved in it, and that was it. And then, so my new album came out last Wednesday, and it was a sort of tense wait as to whether I'd actually released an immersive album or not. But yeah, as we see, it's there and it's marked as Dolby Atmos. And I think this is really powerful, just because as an independent musician, I've been to I go to lots of things like this, and where you've got people who are professional Atmos engineers, and they've got studios that have been certified for £23,000 or something by Dolby in order to set up, and it costs a lot to go through. The record labels that right now are having to cough up for all of their back catalogue to be remixed and re-released in spatial audio. I obviously did most of this with headphone rendering, and I am lucky that I was allowed by Dolby to use a Dolby room at Dolby and Ed Acoustics to monitor. But also a lot of universities now have got Atmos rooms, so there's a lot more accessibility of those to people, and you can rig up your own space. You can do it rigging up your own system without it having to be official Atmos, and still get to this result, and still end up being able to upload. So it's an interesting that you can, and obviously you don't have to start in Elisa. You can just start using the Dolby Atmos panner and renderer, which is pretty intuitive to use. So this was an interesting thing, just to be able to communicate that there is that path there, and there is a pathway for independent musicians. Why is it important? Apart from anything else, Apple now pay 10% more royalties for spatialized mixers than they do for just stereo mixers. Apple sees that this is where it's going. the interesting thing is when people say, but I don't have a spatial system, it's like a lot of people do and don't know they do. All the latest AirPods are equipped with spatialization. Cars, particularly high-end cars at the moment, are beginning to be fit with spatial sounds. That's just going to proliferate more and more. So you kind of won't know that it's you're experiencing spatial, but what that means is that every record label has to provide music to that standard, because it may be played on a spatial system, and you don't want to deliver your client's work that cannot be played unless they've got a specific desire to be in only stereo or only mono, for instance. So I think this is just really interesting to know, and I do some teaching at sort of unis and other academic institutions, and it's great to see that it's just part of the curriculum now. So I think the next generation of producers will come up with this just being a natural part of their daily process. There may still be specializations in people who do spatial, people who do stereo, etc. That may still exist at a sort of high level, but it should be sort of open for all in the future, I guess. Yeah, and now I have those ADM files. I'm enabled to I can play them out in any place that's equipped to play out spatial or Dolby Atmos stuff. So this was my album launched last Wednesday. This is actually the L-Acoustic Showroom, which is a 16.1.12 system, so 12 overheads, 16 horizontals, which are sort of sneakily put behind this acoustically transparent fabric. Yeah, and oh yes, a little bit of and they've also, interestingly for L-Acoustics, they've just fit out their showroom with screens all around. Again, because that's where people are heading. Not every artist is going to use all of those. Screens or consider it important. But more and more people will be doing. More people are coming through their showroom. So that's where they see the future heading for that. So probably just to summarise, opportunities, flexible sound control from soundscapes, so whether it's a 360 sound to just beat-driven tracks, excellent sound coverage from immersive sound as well, heightened audio, there's not just one person in the middle and everyone else is receiving some sort of only bass or only tops or whatever. So excellent sound cover, really heightened audience experience. Kind of accessible programming, and you've now got binaural, which I misspelled, binaural monitoring. More venues are investing in spatial sound systems, and the other thing is, as people do, they require content. So you will be on everyone's list because they'll go, who can show off our speaker system? So it's an interesting opportunity just at this moment. And for the future, there's extensions, if that's part of your practice, to installations and virtual reality. Challenges are, if you want to do an event, so only with the funding could I have to be practical. So most of the gigs I play are going to be in stereo. For me to bring in an L-Acoustic system is a few £1,000s. That's not going to make sense for me in touring. So that is something to consider for now. There is a programming requirement and artist tools, although I feel like AI in the future is probably going to split your track up immediately and present to you an option for spatial panning, so it might do some of the work for you. So that increases your setup and planning, and then the communication across formats. But I'm sure I think in all of initially all like Dolby and L-Acoustics and D&B all had their own plan, and they're sort of doing their own immersive thing. But now I think it's getting to the point where it's so big that they're beginning to look what's everyone else doing and how can we actually offer the opportunity for people to start in Atmos and maybe then translate their stems and the work they've done over into a live experience using Elisa, because it's an Elisa-equipped arena, for instance. So that's basically a sort of summary of my experience so far. And I'm happy to take any questions if we've got time. I don't know how we're doing. Yeah.
Yes. Have you done exploration in terms of performance and actually manipulating the composition live?
So far, not, because there's just me and I've got all the lights going, and I'm doing live stuff over the top. It's been an added layer that I haven't done, but I think it's really interesting that you say that. And Max Cooper did a gig at the at Brixton Academy, maybe, where there was live. In fact, an engineer from L Acoustics was live moving his stuff around the room. And I know that there's a lot of performance artists who do that. I was having a little chat with, is it Flo Fall? Who's got a stand here, who do like watches that you know react to that then create, I guess, media information to change location. And he was saying, you know, you can do panning, you could take a sound and pan it like this. So I was kind of like, yeah, that sounds interesting. And it's also maybe interesting for interactivity for an audience, like an audience could do that in an installation, for instance. But yeah, definitely something to explore. Hello.
You were talking about deriving the individual sounds and splitting them into objects in space. Yeah. If you had a recording in binaural microphones, is it physically possible with technology to derive the location of the individual sounds from that binaural recording, or is that just...
I don't really know. I'm thinking like if you from my more limited experience of recording for it, you know, I've looked at like ambisonic microphones. Like we've got ambisonics where you've got 19 microphones maybe in a cluster that's taking everything. And that's, you know, I did a short thing with, there was a place called Eclectic Lab in London where you'd go and record stuff and then it would just, it was amazing because then it would just automatically remap that out to the spatial audio system, and you would just feel like you were in that environment again. I'm not quite sure whether a binaural recording, there's probably, like for instance at the moment, if you just take a stereo file to Earth in Hackney, they'll do their best to kind of remap it or spread different frequencies, maybe the high frequencies to the overheads, etc. And I'm not sure whether they might have to do something that's a bit hacky like that with a binaural recording, but I probably don't know enough about what's included in the binaural recording that you can kind of split apart again. So it's not something I've tried yet. Any other questions? Oh. You actually don't need to export the stems in there. Basically what it's doing is it's a bolt-on to your DAW. So it's a third party. So all you have to do is drop the plugin that I showed earlier. If you're using, there's two ways of using it. You can use automation and you can stick a plugin on the track and draw it in. Recently, I changed my workflow to use snapshots, which if you're a lighting engineer, you're familiar with snapshots, which is like time code. You have to hack, there's a little thing, you have to hack a bridge of communicating MIDI timecode between the DAW and the controller, but effectively you can then write, okay, at 00:26 seconds, this is what's going to happen. And the interesting thing there actually is in the controller, in the LEs controllers, there's an FX engine. So rather than me draw in, this is going to move here, this is going to move here, it's actually got pre-done effects like move around the room as a sort of simple one, but they've also got things like spiral, spiral downwards at this stage. So you can build effects and then you can say, apply it to this sound at a specific time. But yeah, once you've done your stems into Ableton, that's it, you're kind of done with that. Cool. Yes. That's interesting. I mean, I guess that probably the reason an Atmos, minimum Atmos is a 7.1.4 is probably that's, yeah, a sort of minimum size. It's for this kind of space. I mean, this sort of feels like the kind of size that an Atmos room might be. I don't know because I've sort of never tried, but I mean, you know, people do stuff in quadraphonic sound that's interesting. I forget the name of the lady that kind of pioneered it, who's frequently in London actually. Chiani, Suzanne Chiani, is it? Yeah, who pioneered it. So, you know, there's probably no minimums in terms of being able to split out a sound and move it in, you know, as I say, stereo is almost a form of spatial. But, yeah, I'd probably say if you built it in a 7.1.4 system template, that would probably be good resolution. with other genres of music. Well, yeah, it's interesting because I went to see, there was an installation at a place called Stone Nest in the middle of London by another company who I mentioned called 4D Audio, who are from the Netherlands. And they have a really interesting system because there's, rather than sort of a ring of speakers, they do a grid system. So they had like 30 odd speakers in a grid, including on the floor. So it's very installation. You wouldn't want that in a sweaty club scenario because people would walk all over everything. But they had classical musicians come in, and what was interesting there was a lady playing the violin, and then they were taking, I think it's just like an exploration thing, because what they were doing in that performance was taking the signal and then maybe doing like bounced delays sort of around, because there was like a mezzanine, so they could do that around the gallery. So it's an interesting one because that has to be done live. So you do need someone else. You can't, unless you had some sort of clever way of doing it with a foot pedal. Just thinking about that scenario. Funny enough, again, talking about acoustic bands, let's say, or let's just say a traditional band that might be sort of guitar, bass, drums. More Elisa is used in a concert format to subtly show the position of people on the stage. It's like it's almost faking what you should be able to hear normally. In fact, there's this thing where they used to do the Albert Hall, and they used to close mic all of the instruments and then add Albert Hall reverb onto it in order to sort of give you the impression that you were in the Albert Hall while you were in the Albert Hall. So it's kind of curious as to some instruments almost demand it to sound like it's reality. And again, funny enough, I was at a conference called Everyday is Spatial at the University of Gloucestershire last year, and they did a playback of lots of different genres of music. And funny enough, the one that worked the best was electronic because it's quite surreal. So you can go, first I'm going to do something over here, and then I'm going to do something in the back, and people expect it to be almost quite shocking changes, as it were. And then they played some orchestral stuff that had just been recorded in ambisonics, and everyone was a bit kind of like, it's all right. I actually think it could be really powerful for orchestra, but I think they shouldn't have recorded it ambisonically. I think they should have recorded all of the instruments individually and then remixed it for the room. So yeah, I can see that there's, obviously most of the time I'm working this, so I'm not necessarily considering it, but I can see that there's, challenges. It's just like exploration. Every new thing brings sort of challenges and opportunities, I suppose. But yeah. Was there a particular genre that you were thinking of, or just general? Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah. I was sort of this is song for a bit about like
I think it does. So again, I'd always refer back to the Elisa applications or the applications engineer for whatever. But they're also thinking about phase issues and all sorts of things with relation to it. But there is, like you would if you went into a live environment, you'd take a stereo file and retweak it for the room. Same on Wednesday with that showroom. We had this Dolby format, but the showroom is actually a 16.1.12, and we were remapping a 9.1.6. And actually what was interesting was they had sort of center and left and right next to each other at one end of the room. And it's kind of like, those are too close. None of the audience is going to be able to tell what spatialization is. So the great thing is that we could re-engineer that resolution of room, and then we pushed, for instance, the right and the left further out, and then spread, which is, as you can see, you can spread stuff across speakers in order to patch up the holes. But that was actually it's a good point. It was actually a manual change that we had to make to do that. So yeah, it's imperfect, but I imagine as time goes on, then the software will get better and better about calculating that. Is there a question just here?
In your the new album that you made, because you wrote it, did you write it with the intention of spatialization? Like, was that part of the compositional process?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I do write. First of all, I realised as I did this process, it was really complicated because you start going, so this is how it sounds in stereo or mono, and then I have to think, okay, so it's in this room, okay, it's on headphones, it's a binaural output, it's a stereo output on headphones. You start to get that sort of multiple layers of, but where is it going to go? So I realized that you kind of have to focus in on one thing first of all. So my focus was get the stereo right in the first instance. I wrote it in stereo, but I think as I'm doing this more and more, it creates a little feedback loop. So even though I can't hear it then and there, it's like if you write something on headphones, you're like, I think I know how this is going to sound in a room. I think this is going to work out in things. You kind of, there was a point I remember I wrote something that had a little pattern of like rides going from left to right very quickly. And of course the thought was, this could sound really cool if it's sort of really, really to the left and right of people, you know, and it's almost that ride kind of surreally loud. So I think so it's gradually that, and you know, even just the sense that I'm playing live a lot. I actually think even less about recorded music. I almost see the recorded side of what I do as a sort of repository for people to come and check out the music, but actually I prefer my stuff to be experienced as a live format. So I'm always thinking about live, and I think I'm also beginning to think a lot more about spatial. Okay, I don't know how we're doing for time. I think we're on the hour. So yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you everyone so much for coming.